So I'm really sorry sulla protezione contro il virus expiro.
Ah, ma non c'è problema, no?
No, ma it's covering, it's overlapping the
Oh, sì. Just say okay and
Good.
go on.
So thank you. I'm really sorry not to speak Portuguese.
Questa volta, la prossima volta
This time,
sarà tutto
I
in
hope
portoghese.
next one I can stay here some weeks and learn to speak it. I can understand almost everything if you speak slowly, but it's difficult to me to express myself in English. So I give my presentation in English and then answer in English, but you can speak Portuguese slowly. I can understand everything. So thank you for translating or summarizing what I'm saying. So very kindly, and I'm here. I'm thanking so much João César Castro Rocha, professor, for his invitation to speak here, and the Casa Dirce too. I like this format. It's the first time I've discussed some books of myself, one book at a time, but never, so to say, to give a feedback about a large part of my work of the last 20 years. So it's very interesting. I try to summarize briefly what I have done, and then answering your question, I can deepen one aspect of the other, or the other as you prefer. So the subject of this conversation, of this presentation, is Mimesis, Estética e Antropologia Fundamental. And I try to explain what happened to me in order to be involved in this field. And actually it was the way I met João César the first time, at least through email, when he was in Stanford. The idea was to a lot of places at the end of the 90s where people were studying and trying to give a new idea of what mimesis and imitation is. So many people, for instance, René Girard in Stanford, Luis Costa Lima, to whom introduced me João here in Brazil, I have also translated the huge book by Christopher Wolff and Gunther Gebauer on mimesis from German to Italian, edited 10 years ago. So other people, Michael Taussig, the anthropologist, for instance, who work on mimesis and alterity, a lot of people. So I met them, I tried to understand what's happening in this field, since the object of our interest, that's mimesis, is a very complex one. Just to give you an idea of what this term itself could be referred, one could say that it does not only indicate the process of imitation, nor can it be considered limited to the field of aesthetics and artistic expression, where, moreover, it cannot be reduced to the idea of pure reproduction of an image. It also opens to a field of meanings that point to a broader capacity for mimicry, resemblance, assimilation, representation, simulation, registration, expression, and mimetic anticipation. The mimetic faculty, moreover, holds anthropological complexity and plays a central role in human history, and in the genesis of the subject, in the development of each person's personality too. What characterizes mimesis is its ambivalence, the possibility of becoming the lover of an open, creative, and innovative process, and likewise of a negative, repetitive and destructive process. On the one hand, it contributes to transformation into image and the aestheticization of the world, triggers the vertigo of mimetic desire and rivalry, and the unleashing of the violence of assimilation and expulsion of different. On the other hand, it makes possible the opportunity for a relationship with the other and with the world of a non-instrumental kind, which uncovers unforeseen similarities and unprecedented mixture, in which the particular is defended against the universal and regard is shown for things and men. Maybe it's enough for the first step.
Boa sorte.
Obrigada, professor. Bom, antes de mais nada, né, foi agradecido ao professor João César o convite para estar aqui e conversar com todos vocês. Uma primeira apresentação no estilo de falar sobre, né, os estudos da última década, tendo um feedback a respeito dos livros, das ideias, né, e o professor ele destacou que essa vontade de estudar a mimesis, né, ela volta, né, quando há o encontro com alguns estudiosos da área, como Girard, o Costa Lima, o próprio João, e que a mimesis é um conceito bastante complexo, porque ele não está apenas no reino da imitação e muito menos ligado ao campo estético somente, né? Vai muito além de uma mera ideia do senso comum de reprodução da imagem. Mas pensar a mimesis significa também pensar em ideias como assimilação, representação, antecipação mimética, simulação, ou seja, um conceito central na história da humanidade. Então, em poucas palavras, aquilo que caracterizaria a mimesis seria um processo criativo e inovativo de transformação da imagem e também de estetização do mundo, aquilo que iria contra uma ideia de universalidade de como as coisas e os fatos humanos são apresentados. Foi isso.
Muito obrigado.
So, in front of this complex definition, possible complex definition, what I tried to investigate at first was, so to say, the state of the art. So I organized, I gathered a collective book in 2003 whose title was Politics of Mimesis. Politics of Mimesis. Yes, I could even show the index, but I can give you an idea of that. And where all the people I've mentioned before were collected, and with each of them, if they live, obviously, we had exchanges, tried to focus on the subject better. I'm very proud to have read once again, a couple of days ago, the introduction that João César wrote for the English edition of the book on mimesis and the genesis of culture by Professor Girard. That's an interview he and Pier Paolo Antonello did in 2006, and he reminds, I've forgotten it, he reminds that the first hint to go in that direction to make this interview came from myself for an interview we published, a partial interview, which then we published it in 1996, and later it became a book. The book, one of the most important is there, the idea of mimesis becomes a positive one, not only the origin of violence or rivalry, of scapegoat and so on, but also the origin of civilization, even if sharing a kind of social link, social bondage with others through the violence. So this collection, I mentioned you, Politics of Mimesis, was organized around 3 parts. One part on anthropology, with Gebauer, Wolf, Girard, Dupuy, Taussig, I have mentioned already. Another one about focusing on the idea of representation. So Stephen Hollywell, who was in St Andrews, Scotland at that time, and research on the idea of ancient mimesis, focusing different ideas about Plato's idea of mimesis and Aristotle and so on, Andrew Benjamin and others. And the third part was about the performativity, one of the strongest side of the mimesis itself. So politics in which meaning? Politics of mimesis, political dimension in the realm, first of all, of defining knowledge. Its understanding becomes the stakes of the struggle between contrasting approaches. As in that of representation, other dimension, other side of the same political dimension, the representation of politics itself and its conflicts and the peculiar mixture of fiction and efficacy that characterizes it becomes a valuable heuristic tool in a world in which spillover into reality increasingly presents itself as a media event. So this was the frame of this idea of politics as a struggle inside the definition of knowledge, and politics as a problem of how it works, the mimetic relationship inside the politics as a representation. So I think that frame is still available. Now, more or less, we are in the same general epochal trend, but this is more or less the origin of my work. I can deepen, give you some more information about that if you like. Let me simply remind at that time what happened to my research. Let me tell you in a nutshell, so to say. The idea, but if you want to translate, tell me when is enough, please.
Então, nesse processo de entender, né, a mimesis enquanto uma possibilidade de conhecimento do homem e do mundo, é que o professor se debruçou, né, e mencionou a dimensão política, né, que tem, ou que a gente precisa esbarrar ao tentar definir esse conceito, e, portanto, remontou a uma coleção, né, que foi editada em 2003, que se chamou Políticas da Mimesis, né, Antropologia Políticas da Mimesis, Antropologia e Representação, que foi organizada em 3 partes, né? Então, antropologia, a ideia de representação, que remonta a Platão, Aristóteles, também a Benjamin, e ao conceito de performatividade. Então, o que o professor aqui colocou foi justamente essa necessidade, que talvez seja mais produtiva, de se pensar um conceito que é bastante complexo, né, e que envolveria a nossa possibilidade de compreender como o mundo, a representação de um mundo que cada vez mais se coloca como um mundo midiático.
Sim, da representação, o mundo da representação. So I just want to give you an idea of the work that came from there. The work, but just I want to emphasize what's to me the most important direction of this work is the relationship with the body. I think that what mimesis put on the foreground was the importance of the relationship with the body. So body involvement was the first point to emphasize in that. There are a lot of I wrote 2 books about this this subject. Let me find the right slide. There is no vision on the other one here. Sorry. I wrote one book about mimicry. That's the mimicry, you know, is a specific animal way to survive, to become similar with the environment, phenomenon study at that level, but which became important also for a human being. The other one was a book on imitation in the anthropological philosophy or philosophical anthropology, German direction of thinking, as they call it, not exactly a stream, not exactly a school, but mainly two figures are involved in that, and they were Arnold Gehlen and Helmut Plessner. This book was about the idea of images as an important subject for phylogenesis and ontogenesis, so the individual and the species used imitation to become what they are. The other aspect of the discourse is this mimicry book on the two books. The other one, mimicry book, was a book focused on two other writer, philosopher. I love the border people between the disciplines, who were Roget, Caillois, and Elias Canetti. So what's at stake in this other book? At stake in the book is the relationship between animal and human beings. So animals as term of comparison, but also as something which, for analogy, can be a way to explain human behavior. What was my interest? I can give you some insights about this, but what was my interest in that? The first point in this relationship with non-human animals was the phenomena below the level of consciousness, to stay below the level of consciousness. So the intentional and unintentional behaviors. And this was a way to develop also the dark side of mimesis. So the way mimesis is something which, through which humans commit evil on each other. So this had also, so to say, a methodological output. That's the interest for things like images, anecdotes, stories. So another kind of unconscious dimension, in this case of thought. Precisely what a German philosopher, not included directly in this research, but on which I have also written another book, that is Hans Blumenberg. He spoke of the indirect id, that is in English indirectivity, the fact that you take Umleitungen, Umwege, they are so to say detours, the idea of detours as an elementary form of generation of humans as individuals, but as human beings collectively, as cultures. So culture is in fact not to go from one point to the other one stride, but to take a detour. All the detours are different. This is the the very core of his theory of civilization. And all these authors, in a way or another, when they use indirectivity as a way to explain the relationship with culture, but also all the field of imitation, not reduced to a one-to-one correspondence between model and copy. That's another point. If one interprets it this way, the very idea of mimesis, so it becomes very close, very akin to the idea of metamorphosis that has been developed mainly by Elias Canetti. He uses the word metamorphosis, but sometimes it can overlaps almost entirely with the idea of creative mimesis. And what's creative mimesis? Creative mimesis is the process to imitate not the products of nature, not what ready word one could call natura naturata, the objectification of natural processes, but to imitate the what Aristotle called mimesis to view, that is imitation of the life, but the capability of nature itself to produce, not the products. This is, the idea is this. Not the products, so not natura naturata, objectified outputs, results of nature, but natura naturans, capability of generation, of production, of making, of production, and so on. Maybe it's too much. Interrupt me, please, when it's too much.
Bom, eu espero então que eu consiga sumarizar as ideias, né, que assim como o conceito de mimesis também precisam de uma atenção plena, né, para a gente conseguir fazer ali todas as referências. Mas quando o professor ele termina de pontuar sobre as políticas da mimesis e a tentativa de compreender, portanto, esse conceito dentro de uma dimensão política, ele nos encaminha então para o pensamento acerca da relação entre animal e seres humanos, para que a gente possa compreender aquilo que Aristóteles falou sobre não imitar a capacidade que a natureza tem de produzir. E aí a gente também estaria falando sobre a produção de conceitos de cultura, mas sim entender a mimesis enquanto um meio através do qual resultados são alcançados. Então, para além de falar de um produto pronto e acabado, tentar compreender o objeto. Então aqui ele coloca o conceito de cultura, que estaria, num primeiro instante, vinculado à distinção entre o homem e o animal, como talvez um conceito a ser abordado de forma bastante produtiva, através da percepção da mimesis. Eu espero ter apontado de uma maneira...
Sim, interrupt me if you mean. Don't be shy. So this idea, I'm summarizing the main concepts in a nutshell of these two books. This idea implies a relationship between model and copy, not based on the objective reference, the correspondence one-to-one I mentioned before, but also became very important as a way to build the process of civilization, as I told you, especially by the point of view of the institutions. What are institutions? So in these authors, quite curiously, not only independently one from the other, both Arnold Gehlen in the 40s, after the Second World War in Germany, and Elias Canetti, the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1981, who wrote his book of the life, Crowd and Power, for a long time, but he was working in the 30s and in the 40s about the same concept, that he's curious in both one and the other, worked about the idea of totemism. Totemism is the relationship with other people, with nature, with everything around you, through an animal or an object, a part of the nature around you, which becomes precisely your totem. So, why is it so important, this idea, for these people? Different results, but close one each other. Arnold Gehlen thought to it as a way to rescue himself from his choice to be part of the Nazi party and the Nazi movement. Why? So, totemism introduced in his thinking the idea of mediation. You have a third which allows you to have not a direct connection between the leader and the masses, the crowd, but you have an institution. The genesis of the theory of the institution comes from the institution which mediates between the two levels. So no direct brutal drives inside the people and the Führer, but you needed the rules, the connection. He discovered this in the very idea of totemism. For Canetti, it's closer, the idea of totemism, to the idea of creativity of the original mimesis. We find also, for instance, in Adorno or Durkheim in their book. But it's the idea in Canetti that thanks to the totem you become part of the nature, and vice versa. So you connect yourself to your environment. Another very interesting idea that today too shows its importance in our reality. No division, no separation between human and nature, but they are part of the same context. This is par-delà de nature et culture, against the opposition, as Philippe Delcola called this point, against the opposition between nature and culture, to find again the connections which links together. So, mimesis, if not taken in utilitarian or teleological terms, that is not a mean for a goal, not something you can use simply, or teleologically means something which goes from A to B, that is, which has an historical development inside itself. So it's first step of development, for instance. If not taken this way, it can play a central function of openness and creative link between, as I mentioned, but in a deeper way, body and culture. So, body and culture. So we can also, following this former interest to the idea of mimesis, not utilitarian and not teleological terms interpreted, we may also mention one other point of the research I did, the new direction which the state of the art allowed me to follow, and is the idea of non-sensible similarity. That's a concept coming from Walter Benjamin, Unsinnlichkeit, that is the fact that use mimesis between different media. In this case is the language, the area, not simply the body is implied in the language, but involved in the language. There is an embodiment of language, but also a language side of body in this way. So, more or less, maybe I take a break.
Então, o que o professor está querendo chamar a nossa atenção é para que a gente se afaste de uma concepção, né, de mimesis que estava muito ligada ao senso comum e que nos dizia que a mimesis, por exemplo, era cópia, né, de um real ou de uma ideia de cultura também muito una e acabada. Então, para além de uma correspondência exata entre a imagem e a sua representação, há a necessidade da gente buscar perceber as múltiplas conexões, né, que podem ser feitas na maneira como uma determinada cultura, né, puxando o que foi falado no bloco anterior, é compreendida e, nesse sentido, abrindo também a diversas possibilidades interpretativas. E para que a gente possa pensar esse conceito de uma forma ainda mais densa, né, já que entre o real e a sua representação existe aí a mimesis sendo colocada, o professor sugeriu a noção de totem, que era para que a gente pudesse, de fato, continuar a pensar sobre essa relação que nós estabelecemos com o outro, que é diferente de nós. Eu acho que pode continuar, professor.
Sim, sim, muito bem. Obrigado. So let me add just a couple of points and then open the discussion. The first point is to give you an idea of what this could imply. For instance, if we use, sorry, I'm coming to the point, I'm not familiar with this kind of program. 1 minute, I'm there. So, just one couple of points. First point is the point, and I can deepen on what you prefer after, but now take 2 points. The first one is the comparison between these two sides of the European research in the 30s, 40s, 50s, that is to take a parallel, to have a parallel reading of the results of Roger Caillois and Leonard Plessner about the plexus, mimesis, imitation, and mimicry. And the second point is to come back to Aristotle as a kind of recap of one of the most important point in this new reading of the phenomena of mimesis. About this comparison, Caillois-Plessner, one could say that the intertwining of imitation, mimesis, and mimicry presents several points of common interest, convergence, divergence, but in particular, both of them start from the relationship between man and animal. While Caillois focuses on the dimension of imitation that lies below the level of consciousness, going so far as to assume a kind of human mimicry, Plessner concentrates on the human monopolistic character of imitation by comparison. In their post-World War II output, however, both seem to adopt a kind of transformation or shift from substance to function, which enables them to make imitation, the mask, and the associated play accessible to a kind of horizontal phenomenology of culture the same time, both, through following different paths, found themselves studying the oppressive form of adaptation, violence, and subjugation implicit in imitative processes. They also share a common approach to the concept of distancing, to the indirectness of relationship, to the detours that produce the plurality of cultures. In both cases, we are finally confronted with an anthropological perspective in which the imitative reproductive dimension is neither exhausted nor explained in utilitarian and teleological terms, which discovers the possibilities of mimesis as an imitation of the incoactive productive capacity proper to the nature, as I explained before, far beyond the mere copying of its objectivation. And that is the first point I want to emphasize before concluding my presentation. The second one is, as I mentioned, just a provocative way to cope with the subject of mimesis, to remind that for Aristotle, poetics, tragedy is mimesis not of man, but of action and life. Praxeos kai biou. Of mimesis, the fact that poiesis act of, it is a poiesis that is an act of generation to be privileged in the idea itself of mimesis. It can be considered mimesis, quoting again Aristotle, only insofar as it is mimesis to biou, imitation of life itself, in its capacity to generate, and any rational reading of mimesis as a copy duplication of a real betrays it. From the creative power of action, mimesis descends the ability to transmit to the mimemata its own, the object, the production of mimesis is the mimemata, its own vital force, dynamis, which triggers emotional blow in a chain that hooks and pulls those who make mimesis and those who contemplate it. Key words of mimesis are therefore also metabole and, as I told, metamorphosis. Metamorphosis, in Canetti's term, is precisely the opposition to the stiff rigidity of the mask, of the act of the survival, that is the man of power, the Machthaber, and a way to react against the blockage of life in a form. That's something which reminds another direction of my personal research, but a connected conceptual frame to this, that is the philosophy and sociology also, but the meta-philosophy, one could say, of Georg Simmel, a German philosopher at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, who in methodological terms could be explained as the capability to keep together two opposite terms, that is, to the poles of an opposition. So you are not, let me finish the sentence I finished, to keep together, to maintain the tension, the spannung he wrote, between two opposite terms. That's a methodological point which allows us also to interpret better the very idea of mimesis, not reduced to what we think as imitation, and let it open the creative side that he includes. Please.
Então, se a mimesis ela pode ser um conceito que nos ajuda a compreender, né, as representações que são feitas, ou a representação que normalmente se faz de uma determinada cultura, poderíamos facilmente, então, voltar para a época da Segunda Guerra Mundial e estabelecer, assim, um horizonte metodológico que visa compreender de uma maneira mais crítica e também dialógica o universo de violência e de subjugação de determinadas culturas, né? E assim nos afastar de um conceito tradicional de cultura monolítico e nos aproximarmos daquilo que seria uma pluralidade a respeito desse universo. E assim sermos confrontados com um horizonte antropológico que as mimesis nos permitiria avistar. Afinal de contas, a mimesis deve ser compreendido novamente como uma imitação produtiva, né? E isso Aristóteles já dizia quando colocava que tragédia, né, não era uma imitação do homem, né, ou do homem, mais especificamente, mas sim da ação da vida, né? E, portanto, um aspecto inerente à poiesis. Nesse sentido, a mimesis, então, e a gente volta sobre a principal ideia que o professor está aqui defendendo, não é uma cópia, né, do real, mas sim uma espécie de seleção, organização de determinados elementos, né, que ao duplicar o real através da sua representação, não traria, portanto, aquela segurança que tanto queremos, mas uma rede de indagações, uma dinâmica vital que manteria juntos dois termos opostos, né? Em suma, a mimesis é uma potência, uma possibilidade criativa de representação.
Uau!
Isso, professor.
Pô, foi brilhante isso, não foi? André, a história do brilhante.
Obrigada, professor.
Uau! Não foi muito bom? Nossa!
Obrigado. You know, so I think that the first presentation is enough. I spent a half hour here, and this is a tentative recap, but we can deepen whatever you want. So thank you for that.
Muitíssimo obrigado ao professor André Bossari, muitíssimo obrigado, Larissa, por essa tarefa inesperada de uma tradução imediata. Vou explicar rapidissimamente o protocolo que nós seguimos. Esse é um seminário de altos estudos, alguns já conhecem. O professor Bossari nos enviou alguns textos dele, alguns já possuem, os que não tem ainda eu enviarei, e nós agora vamos conversar sobre os textos que já teremos lido, ou teremos pelo menos tido uma ideia, um contato inicial. Então a ideia, a partir de agora, é um diálogo intenso, por mais umas 2 horas. Eu peço que não saiam, porque ao final teremos uma recepção em homenagem ao professor Bossari. Então, podemos começar. Como a democracia aqui na Casa Dia se vige, o Eric fará a primeira pergunta. Viva a democracia! Só peço que todos se identifiquem para efeito da gravação. Por favor.
É democracia de democratura.
Hey, Andrea. Well, mimesis is not exactly my topic, but I was thinking about Walter Benjamin when you mentioned the notion of what is it again? I forget the expression. Unsinnlichkeit. Yeah. As many other concepts by Benjamin, this one is very pragmatic. It's very difficult to understand. And the notion that there's this kind of archive in the language of nonsensible similarities, it's very hard to explain. I'm very curious about that. How do you interpret this this notion?
Oh, it's a very interesting subject. Let me find the point in order to give you a better answer. The PowerPoint doesn't work. I'm driving. No, actually, Benjamin.
Maybe there is a connection to the other texts on language, like on language in general, where he works this idea of spiritual lessons, geistiges Wesen, It's as mystical as the idea of known similarities.
No, I want to give you a better answer, but Benjamin actually had several phases, several parts in his thinking, and when he arrived to the very idea of imitation independently, he wrote a lot of things about at least a couple of comprendu of the work of Kaiwa, but he had already written at that time the essay on mimetic faculty and philosophy of language. So the idea mainly is at that time he discovered a relationship with the body. That's the point. He had it before. He had it before in this strong way. So the way body is implied in his theory is, so to say, the fact. For instance, think to a text he worked on many times at that time, during that period, that is Berlin Childhood. In that text you can find the specific primordial attraction for the mimesis as, you remember probably the hunt of the butterfly. The hunt of the butterfly, the young boy hunting a butterfly, he felt the primordial law of the hunt, which began to apply between him and the butterfly. Benjamin, I quote, "The more I myself, with all my fibers, adhered to the animal, the more in my innermost being I became a butterfly. The more the insect in its actions took on the color of human determination, and finally it was as if its capture was the prize by virtue of which I alone could regain my human being." So through the animal he became himself, even if in the hunting, so, but it's the primordial element, the fact that thanks to the mimetic process you become a human being, so mimesis is decidedly anthropogenetic in this perspective. But when he is privileged ground of analysis, after this, one could say, anthropological turn inside his thinking, his privileged ground of analysis became the language. Again, the language was the place where you may see non-sensible similarities, since it's the changing of medium that allows the non-sensible, the fact that they are embodied inside the language itself. Yes, Benjamin at that time arrived to what one could call liquidation of magic. He left it as the same. Die Magie der Sprache war nicht mehr da. No more magic of the language, but he reformulated the problem of the experience precisely. His point of reference became the perceptual world of the modern man that contains but scant relics of the magical correspondences and analogies that were current among ancient people. And so he focused especially on the transposition and transformation of the mimetic faculty in language and writing. So a kind of changing transmodal level of translation of the appearances in the medium of the language, but always thinking to this kind of, if you remember about writing about Franz Kafka, he mentioned a totemic tree connecting the reality of modern man to the deepness rooted in the primitive scene where all this magic survives as an echo, but not completely erased. Obviously, that's the importance of myth in analysis of the modern city and so on and so forth. I think that to understand this, the best way is to follow him. For instance, the examples he does are not so clarifying, but the direction it is. For instance, he mentioned the physiognomy of the physiognomic of the writing, for instance, as an example of that, or the telepathy phenomenon. He quotes Freud about that. So he mentioned the fact that language embodies a kind of experience, for instance, of the child when he makes a meal with his arms, or he becomes what he's imitating, like the hunter of the butterfly. So in order to understand this, one has to think to not continuity with the essays you mentioned on the philosophy of language over his first time, and think to this coming to the foreground of the perceptual world and of the problem of what experience is. So Leben against Erfahren, and the discovering of some ways to go back and find a new frame of reference for the big cities, and that's why not only methodological term, but he refers to Georg Simmel, the idea of metropolis and life of the spirit or the mind and so on. So, but this could be the first step of but yes, one should analyze point by point, but the frame is this.
As perguntas também podem ser feitas em português. O professor entende perfeitamente.
E se não entendo, pergunto outra vez.
Nova rodada democrática. Democracia é tudo. Vinícius. Pois, se identifica, Vinícius, por favor, para efeito na gravação.
Eu sou fui orientando o professor João César na UERJ em literatura comparada e literatura, e hoje sou professor de literatura. E queria saber
Congratulations.
Obrigado. Eu queria saber na ideia de tanto de atuação quanto de jogo, mas sobretudo na ideia de jogo mimético, possível entre culturas, um jogo intercultural, em que a gente sabe que, como em qualquer outro jogo, há a intenção de interferir no comportamento alheio.
Comportamento?
No comportamento do outro. No comportamento do, entre aspas, adversário, companheiro de jogo, no caso da mimes. A pergunta é, a noção de trapaça no jogo, de roubar no jogo, ela também importa nessa relação intercultural?
O sujeito da sentença é
Cheating.
Cheating.
If it is also part of the intercultural relationship.
That is a general question. out of the frame I have designed. Anyway, I try to answer. By my point of view, what's interesting here in playing, there is a metaphor that Roger Caillois uses, referring to what we could translate a kind of secularization of the sacred. In a world dominated by the sacred, you have a vertical relationship in the phenomena of, for instance, sacrifice. To sacrifice means to put a relationship with something that's behind your the immanence of our life. What happens actually both in the theories of Roger Caillois and in the theory of Plessner, after the World War II, more or less something similar in Galen, as I mentioned about institution too. What was a vertical relationship became an horizontal one. So they used what they have discovered in terms of identification of forms, shapes. Mimicry is one of these shapes. They used this kind of shapes, no more in the vertical foundation grounding of transcendent relationship, but in order to explain cultural phenomena. So also mimicry became one of the forms of the play, and the fact that the human, and this is more it's closer to Plessner thinking, thought, the fact that you build your identity thanks to the capability to transpose yourself in another one, so through the alienation of yourself, so to say, in another one, in order to put yourself in it by his point of view, became also a way to understand the relationship with cultures, between cultures, the intercultural relationship. I have interrupted my comparison. The image by Caillois about the secularization of sacred was that you have first the shaman, someone who connects himself with the transcendental, with the shamanic, for instance, journeys with drugs or other kind of experience of possessions. In ancient China, he writes, the shaman became a mandarin, so a functionary, someone who works for the everyday life, for the state and so on. And this is the changing of the acts from vertical to horizontal capability to explain cultural phenomena. In this term, I think that someone could be useful also for understand intercultural relationship thanks to play or game, but it's not, I should think more about that, but if you have a reaction, I can react to a reaction.
A minha questão também, posterior, enquanto eu ouvi o professor falar, se tornou, tentei falar uma coisa só, que é, mesmo quando o jogo não é um jogo de soma zero, quando as relações são orientais, são horizontais, ainda é necessário pensar nisso.
Se o jogo não é de soma zero, essa é a pergunta.
Se a questão permanece válida, if the question is still holds.
He still
Holds.
I don't know. It's not so easy to answer. I try to explain me better, please.
If you understand Vinicius' question, because I know that he has been thinking about it for a long time, he's very much concerned with a specific aspect of René Girard's theory. The fact that the only liberty you have is that you can choose the model. But what does it take place when the model that you choose is not precisely exemplary? So I think he's transferring this question to the notion of game. So game has rules and patterns. But what happens when one player deliberately tries to cheat? So does the rules still apply? Does the mimesis has the same consequences? Or what would you do with this? I think this is the question he's asking. Não é isso, Vinícius?
Traduzir só um finalzinho do que você mesmo falou, João, eu peguei para ver se você...
A mesma preocupação sua com a escolha do modelo como a única liberdade possível, mas o que acontece quando o modelo não é exemplar?
Sim.
Então você transfere essa questão para o jogo. O jogo tem regras e padrões, mas o que acontece quando uma das pessoas envolvida no jogo, de maneira deliberada, rouba ou trapaceia?
So I understand now the question better.
Sort of inverted mimesis.
Yeah, that's deceiving the fact that
That's it, yeah.
Seemingly
you obey the rules, but at the same time you are undermining them.
See, but I don't know if this is a problem connected to mimesis as itself. I think that's a true problem. I agree with you, but a problem related to, for instance, to rules and how to establish them. So a kind of problem of conflict between legitimacy and legacy, the Legitimität und the fact that you have a set of rules and you have to verify on what they are based. So the conflict is between these two levels. So an intra-systemic problem more than, so something which needs more than a connection with mimesis theory, in my opinion, needs, so to say, a verification. You have to verify the connection between the levels, a meta-level discussion. That's what is implied. So, in political terms, could be the legitimation, the foundational, the constitution, this kind of transposition to reflection on what makes legality and what produced legality when something doesn't work, in how do you apply the rules. That's the point. So, but I don't think that's it's no more a question of mimesis, in my opinion. I don't think so. Anyway. No, it's a good problem, and probably a problem at the level of theory of systems, at the level of political systems, and juridical reflection.
An ethical issue, actually. Yeah.
Ethical also, yes.
Ethics of communication.
That's it, yeah.
Even, I was thinking to Habermas in this moment.
That's what
Habermas, of course,
Flusser does that in the Veritas Infernales.
Oh, I see,
When
yeah.
he says that the purpose of human communication is to convince, usually is to convince someone of something.
Yeah.
But Empiroclitus instead wants to deceive, always, because he wants to eat the
Of
other.
course, yeah.
So there's a complete different communication ethics.
And even not necessarily digesting.
No.
No, but it's a way to
Mas obrigado, Vinícius. Muito boa questão. Vou passar a palavra agora para o professor Eduardo Losso e aproveito para agradecer publicamente, porque se não fosse a parceria da UERJ com a UFRJ através do Eduardo Losso, nós não poderíamos trazer o Borsari. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
Bem, primeiramente eu queria dizer que eu eu li o seu artigo sobre notas dissonantes, sobre essa questão da relação da dissonância com a temporalidade moderna. Enfim, achei muito interessante. Mas minha pergunta vai para a questão o que o senhor se desenvolveu aqui nesse texto do Benjamin sobre a doutrina da semelhança e a ideia de faculdade mimética, né? Nesse texto, a gente tem a impressão, é uma impressão que é muito comum na obra do Benjamin em geral, de que ele desenvolve uma faculdade mimética que se exercita através da prática das semelhanças, e à medida em que o homem vai desenvolvendo a linguagem e a escrita, muito especialmente, ele vai perdendo essa capacidade de produzir semelhanças. Há uma liquidação da magia, que você se referiu, inclusive, né? E parece que existe um estágio de secularização desse processo, em que você quase perde essa faculdade, mas ela, de qualquer maneira, ela se torna ativa, um aroma permanece, né? A minha pergunta é como que a gente poderia pensar essa perda da magia, né? Toda essa secularização, todo esse desencantamento que vai se fazendo processualmente a partir da escrita. Em outros textos ele desenvolve a questão da áurea e da deserotização, né? Mas como que a gente poderia pensar isso hoje num contexto de que o que a gente está observando é uma espécie de reencantamento do mundo, né? De revalorização de sabedorias de semelhança, de sabedorias míticas, enfim, o que o professor pensa sobre isso?
Very good question. No, I think that Benjamin, one could say that he has inside his thinking a kind of theological direction, so the arrow of time. So he thinks as a loss of something. But actually, if you want to read, for instance, referring to his work on the Paris of the 19th century, if you read this text, not thinking that what comes is you are losing all of that, but that the myth still works, that the symbol, even if secularized, still is present there. So that old and new, the different kind of times that he finds in a multi-layer in this city, they are not a time which will be lost and another one which will come, but they stay together in the same epoch. If you read this kind of hybrid city or hybrid kind of temporalities, plurality of time, and as is not so friend, but is someone with whom we discussed a lot, as Bloch called contemporaneity of not contemporary in the same epoch. So different kinds. I've tried to describe this as the very idea of dissonant times in the same time. So you have this kind of presence together, all this. If you don't look at it from the point of view of the arrow of time, but you think as something which is still there. So in the kind of thinking I tried to explain very briefly, which maintains the oppositions and not the antinomies, not choosing one of them. You have a tool in order to understand much better our contemporary reality, where the sacred is side by side with the commodification, with the mysticism, with all kind of things, all together in the same times. And obviously, there is a further comment I can do about this specific point. I'm not sure that it's un reincanto do mondo. Maybe it's like let me make a parallelism between this phenomena and religion itself. So the fundamentalism is a reaction to modernity, not simply something which was already there. It's a new way to interpret religious tradition as reacting to the modernization processes. The same, I think, this kind of partly commodified, partly real coming back of the enchantment of the Encanto is something like that, enhanced by as a reaction to the commodification, the no meaning life and things like that. So, one could call un canto como reação à secularização, un encanto moderno, un encanto which entails in itself the element of what is trying to oppose to, something like that. That's my idea in general is this, but we could write a series of books on this subject. Anyway, Benjamin is someone who oscillates between different point of view, but I think that the best one is this one. He never renounces definitely to the idea of aura. He keeps it in him a trace, something like connected to the so to say, to the value of exhibition that's very close to something sacred inside, but not completely sacred as it was in the total social fact of the art mixed with religion and so on and so forth before. So it's a trace of sacred. The sacred we can allow us to have, to maintain. Art played this role for a long time, but now art is spread everywhere. We are in what one could call aestheticization of the world, that is using the means or the tools of art to make attractive everything in the world. So also this appearance or echo or longing for sacred trace is spread everywhere. That's more or less.
Thank you very much.
No, you are welcome. Very interesting question anyway. An epochal question. We are in that epoch. We have to
Se identifica, tá, Júlia? Não, se identifica, por favor. Fala o tempo que você quiser.
Hi, Professor. My name is Julia, and I studied with João César de Casocha, and I was very interested in the women's perspective on mimetic theory, especially studying the works of Carson McCullers. I don't know if you have heard of her. She's an American writer from the 40s.
Mm-hmm. Repeat the name, please.
Carson McCullers.
Carson McCullers.
Yeah, and she's very into some insights that Girard also developed in his philosophy. So when I was reading your work, two images were very special, I don't know, caught my attention. The image of an animal that disappears in the environment because he changes color, something like that in the book. And the second image was the insect that in the intercourse grabs the head of the other, and the female insect that grabs the head of the other. So could we think of mimesis in a female perspective using these images? Or is it possible?
The point of view of the eater, you say, in this case. No, I'm kidding. No, a very interesting question. Well, the specific images you use, one could read them by point of view of women thinking to the first as a kind of reaction. Mimicry has already been described as not only women, but also, for instance, slaves or marginals or people under pressure of a strong power which tries to use mimicry in a way to survive, becoming like your master, like your becoming similar to it. It's a kind of famous reaction that I also know. I don't know the writer you mentioned, but I read it in her books obviously as soon as possible. But the point is that yes, there is people which receive a strong power who react. Also in genetical reconstruction, for instance, thanks to Adorno and Durkheim, they see the mimesis to become in the elementary basic animal behavior, to become like a dad, to look like a dad is a way to survive, the first level of mimesis. And this is a strategy used, both this and the other one, to become similar to dominant classes. So think to, for instance, in migration, the difference between the first, second, third generation, one could interpret it this way. One generation...
Or the explorer, the country, for example, the country that exploits us, and like we also have a mimetic relationship with the
behavior
stronger country.
Yeah, to be accepted, in order to be accepted.
Loved, and we form our identity also in regards to the...
And the second generation develops a reaction to this process of mimetic and so on. So it's something which can be watched from the other side of the point of view. The prayer mantis is another matter, the female insects which divorce. This is, one could say, let's take the example. Biography should not explain theories, but sometimes helps. Roger Caillois went to Argentina during the World War II. He stayed there, he was there for some reason, but he stayed there during the war. He changed there his mind about the idea to be close to the forces of destructions, his feeling, his famous presentation at the Collège de Sociologie called Le Vent d'Hiver, where he asked to become violent before he felt that something was happening just some months before the Second World War. We need violence, we need sacrifice, we need... No, he changed completely his mind going to Argentina. He wrote an essay against Hitler. Benjamin who think that some of his texts were also an apology of the fascist practice, wrote. So he writes now what everyone could think, finally, against Hitler. But not only this, he fall in love with a famous writer, Argentinian writer, Victoria Ocampo, and all life long they live as true. Think that she died, and 1 month, she was older than him of 10 years or more, I don't remember. She died, and 1 month later he died too. Like two people living together all the life long. So maybe he was rescued or saved by this woman, I don't know. Anyway, the praying mantis is something like a ghost, an horrible, phantasmatic kind of a persecutor, the image of the poisonous woman, so a kind of historically well described by him, kind of prejudice against women, but he took in charge curiously to demonstrate him the opposite, and so maybe one could interpret this also as a way to dare to say something he couldn't agree later in his life. And actually, even in this case, he described more with the eye of an entomologist what happened in his last books about Medusa and Ca. He was a very good researcher of the phantasmatic dimension. For instance, a book like The Pieuvre, the book about the octopus. He described in a very good way this kind of phantasmatic, haunted part of the imaginary. That's why I think that his idea of mimesis or mimetic interpretation is close to understand better the evil. And in that case, he felt himself solidar in connection with the evil, but he changed his mind. We can say that. But obviously that's a very negative stereotype one cannot share. But the description is very good. The history of the myth is very interesting. So I think that also by a point of view of women could be a way to understand better the Western imaginary, at least. But not only Western, he also quotes Indian mythology, other things like that. Why not? To appropriate of the culture of the enemy and then transform it, but it's just a suggestion.
So, like, in the women's perspective, we could be like anthropophagus. Like,
yes,
like
the same kind of make the devil of the other. Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And who really benefited from the relationship between Victoria Ocampo and Roger Caillois was actually Jorge Luis Borges.
Yeah, it's true, it's true.
The first thing Caillois did in returning to France was to publish a collection of short stories by Borges in a very important collection, the La Croix du Sud.
He founded
and then Michel Foucault could quote Borges in Les Moyens choses.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But let me raise there are so many things that we could actually talk about, but let me just raise one point, just to listen to you more, to your reflections. And regards the centrality you give to the body in your reflection concerning mimesis. And then two questions related to that. First, how would you include in your reflection the recent discoveries in the past 10, 15 years, especially from the neuroscience, like the mirror neurons, or the way they have been finding that actually the brain is a mimetic machine. So how does this impact your reflection? First question. Second question, also related to the body. At least in my reading, in Arnold Gilliam's Der Mensch, seine Stellung in der Welt, the body is also central. The centrality of the body, but with an important difference. In Gilliam's reflection, and that was very important to Wolfgang Iser's literary theory, the human species as a species are inspecific. That is to say, there isn't any speciality in the Homo sapiens as far as the body is concerned. But this precariousness, this physical precariousness, would have been fundamental to the development of culture, because then mimicry would have to develop itself into mimesis in a sort of a more complex way of reproducing patterns. So you have the body, on the one hand, in the recent findings, the brain as a mimetic operation, how does it impact your reflection? And on the other hand, coming back to Arnold Gillen, how will you see this precariousness of the Homo sapiens as an animal with no specificity, and how it would have been important to turn mimicry into mimetism, into mimesis?
Yes, yeah, at the end of the book, well, I think, if I remember correctly, what I've written, I mentioned the mirror neuron as maybe a confirmation of the importance of the mimetic dimension as a constitutive for man, for becoming human being, more precisely. So as an anthropogenetic necessary step in our life. And I have discussed with some of the people, since a lot of them work nearby me.
Some Italians.
The Italians have written, they worked a lot on that. I'm not so sure. Anyway, embodiment is the point. So the patterns are embodied. You, for instance, have in the same area of the brain so to say, the neurons connected to visual and to motion. That's why you, watching to someone, also feel what is happening to him. That's a very important discovery. Even if at a degree zero of ethical involvement. So no empathy, you are not obliged to empathy. This, or in the torture, you watch, but you feel good in watching someone tortured. So it doesn't imply that you feel at what he's feeling in an ethical or empathic. This is another step that implies different cultural patterns, in my opinion. So it's not something so you cannot sanctify neurons. Yes, but it confirms that there is a level in which you are connected to other people, not simply by cultural or behavioral patterns, but also strictly by your body. That's important. But the consequences could be very different. That's the point I want to stress in that referring to. I've discussed with Vittorio Gallese a lot about it. He has a philosophical background, quite strange, so he quotes Merleau-Ponty about it, but so the connection is not clear. But anyway, it's good. It confirms. In general, what you referred to Galen was already the rival of Gottfried Herder. So the idea that you are the man with no instincts, so to say. Nietzsche confirmed the diagnosis, and then Galen systematized, but also Plessner, before him, they systematized these ideas that the fact that you have no one-to-one reaction doesn't allow you to have a one-to-one answer to a question. You may stimulus, answer, it's different. So that's why the level of literature, also Blumenberg worked a lot with the group Poetic und Hermeneutik on that subject. You, both on the level of literature, but also on the level of body, constitution, body, you haven't the relation one-to-one. That's why without specific instincts, without, you have the extrauterine springs, so you become independent after 20 years, that your brain develops till 25. So the specificity of human being, a species, is not to be specific in an environment, in an ecological niche, in a kind of And that's one of the points that the philosophical anthropology has systematized in a very good way. Given there is a little bit too much, in my opinion, of rigidity of different, like a history, a natural history of becoming man, human being. More reflexive and interesting maybe could be the solutions by Plessner, since he based the relationship with our body on the level of the, what he calls eccentric positionality, that is, that you have a body and you are a body. Körper haben und Leibsein, that means that you oscillate between the two and you don't resolve to be one only of this. This is the same kind of logical mechanism I have tried to explain starting from Simmel, but it also works here. The eccentric positionality is precisely this capability to be, not at the same time, but to be a body and to have a body. So to have intention, but to live simply bodily. That's it's much it fits better to our needs of interpretation, explication, in my opinion, that the natural history of Galen. But so it's Plessner had to do with Husserl, with the phenomenology, not only with Driesch and so natural history. So it's something interesting. My point of view is that, my opinion is that this could allow us to understand better the relationship with the body, this oscillation between the two different sides. That's not a way to reintroduce a dualism, no, just to prevent any objection. It's not that. It's a way to overcome dualism, but not overcoming the different parts you have in your behavior and mind. So the mind changes with the body, but they are present, both are present and works together in a certain meaning, but not at the same time, not always at the same time. A step forward, maybe.
Obrigado.
Obrigado também pela pergunta.
Outra pergunta para o Eric? Tá, então vamos fazer assim, proponho. O Eric fará a última pergunta e aí vamos para o coquetel, em homenagem ao professor Borsari. Todos de acordo?
Sim.
Todos de acordo com o coquetel?
As 2 horas, o coquetel parte das 2 horas. 3 horas.
E continuamos a conversa, claro.
You mentioned the issue of empathy. I think there's a really interesting connection between mimesis and empathy. There's a really interesting book by a German psychologist, Fritz Breithaupt. It's called The Dark Sides of Empathy. And it has this really interesting theory where, in order for you to understand what's going on with someone else, you have to fictionalize your position. It's an aesthetic process where you invent, a new way of being. Of course, you can never ontologically be someone else, but in the process of empathy, you can try to imaginatively take the position of the other. So maybe there's this really interesting connection between mimesis and the relation to otherness in a very radical way. What do you think about that?
No, it's true. My only objection to this, I read the book you suggest, but my objection to that, in general, to the theory of empathy is that using empathy, you suppose that it's possible to be another one, not simply to imagine. You leave the Spaltung, the openness between the two. You cannot overcome this difference. So it's a way to skip the difference. Maybe one could say empathy as such. But using imagination, becoming another in your behavior, try to understand what is happening to him, even thanks to mirror neurons. Yes, that's very good, and it's a process to there was, when the book by Michael Taussig was published, there was a strong discussion.
Universality.
Yeah, universality, Martin J. discussed. The most important objection is that he couldn't maintain the difference between mimesis and mimicry in this book. So becoming the other is not, or try to, like mimicry, is completely different from imagining what is happening to him and try to understand what's happening this way. But keep yourself safe of the fact that you cannot never become one another. So you are is more respectful of difference. Empathy could be, that's why maybe about deceiving is a way to, in the public discourse, this emphasis on empathy. If you, I have to do with, in my teaching with designers, for instance, they always speak of empathy. You have to empathize with people you are working for. Well, but how can you become another one? You can understand, you try to you maintain a tension between you and you learn from him, but you cannot be the other one. So respectful means to know that it's different, not the same. And the enthusiastic approach to mimesis of Michael Taussig, that's why I interviewed 20 years ago about this. He couldn't answer. But also Martin J. wrote Conrad Dury, criticism of this. Paul Stoller, an anthropologist, discussed this point. You cannot overlap. And the problem with empathy, completely, and the problem with empathy is more or less the same, in my opinion.
Vou dar a chance do Rafael fazer uma pergunta.
Em português.
Como você quiser, italiano, português.
Italiano.
Sì, italiano. Allora, Andrea, ti ringrazio tantissimo e tirando un po' l'acqua al mio mulino, visto che facciamo questo incontro la settimana prossima, eu queria convidar todos, semana que vem o André vai ao UERJ fazer uma palestra sobre a experiência na literatura italiana contemporânea. Então eu queria fazer uma pergunta relacionada a esse tema da experiência que você tocou, né? Como que se enquadraria na questão estética, a questão da experiência, se você pudesse aprofundar um pouco esse tema, né? E uma outra pergunta também, já que eu estou aqui, relacionada ao capítulo 12 do totemismo de Elias Canetti, né, a referência, se você pudesse aprofundar um pouco, né, quer dizer, esse desdobramento político, né, eu fiquei muito interessado por essa questão, que inclusive o João, né, com o João trabalha.
Obrigado, Rafael.
Bom, posso fazer uma complementação da pergunta dele?
Claro. O Marcelo Barbosa.
Com relação à questão do totemismo, eu gostaria de saber se existe, com as proximidades da concepção do totemismo em Canetti, com relação às explorações políticas que o Freud propôs para esse termo. São próximas, são distantes?
Sì, no, entiendo, comprendo la pregunta. Three more questions, very good. Now let me think a little bit. No, in general, I'm looking for the PowerPoint. No. Freud, Canetti felt Freud as one of his worst enemies. In his opinion, Freud didn't understand what a mass is, what a crowd is, how it works, and so on. in this case of totemism, I think that not to use always the same kind of conceptual scheme, but one could say that in Freud conception, totemism is something vertical. So what emphasizes the vertical relation, the relation of, and in the case of power, of dominance, the fact that he's founding the power this way. In case of Canetti, one could say that it's horizontal. He thinks to the animals as a way to become closer to the other, to share a cultural frame, to be involved in the same. So he also speaks of something like a positive effect of that, not simply. I think that's this. On the contrary, is not in opposition with the theory by Gehlen I mentioned before, where the totemism is a way to mediate between the different communities and inside the community. This is the common reference. Plus, one could say the fact that these horizontal theories allow us to be part of the environment, to be inside the same reality as the so-called other part of nature is. So you feel inside the natural environment as a part of it, not since we live naturally, but in the meaning the meaning of nature is not something which is opposite to man, when one can destroy without limits and so on. We are part of it, we depend on, we are in a systemic relationship. One could say that totemism is an elementary, a basic form of culture in order to cope with this, to honor this. And by this point of view, totemism is much, Canetti, or even the institutional totemism of Gehlen is much more contemporary to our problem than Freud's one. That's my opinion. About the other question by Raphael, yes, aesthetic experience is something which re-establishes a kind of possibility for memory. Memory becomes the difference between the shock of the Leibniz, the punctual, the instantaneous reaction to a stimulus of which doesn't leave traces behind it in the Leibniz. The difference between this and the Erfahrung is that the Erfahrung is an idea of an experience which lasts, whose effects lasts. You don't lose your memory, you are not shocked, you are not traumatized, you cannot think of what you lived, and so on. So, fahren, Erfahrung, experience, in German, fahren is to travel. So, the fact that you have traveled so much, you can make treasure of your experience. So, keep memory. Tell stories, storyteller problem is the same level in the vision of Benjamin. And so the experience which the mimesis in the creative and positive interpretation, I have given my final perspective on natura naturans, so imitation of the capability of nature to be generative, to leave something its life, her or in life. So this, the experience is something that can be, if not rescued or healed, but helped, one could say, by the use of mimesis. Since mimesis gives value to, for instance, the singular. You have a specific relationship with something, to the capability of feeling, not in the meaning, absolute feeling of the empathy, but also to put yourself by the point of view of the other. That's very important in affirmative way of interpreting Mimesis. So, obviously, the author I mentioned, Kewa, who was also able to describe this kind of transformation into game of the dramatic problems he has focused in his first part of the life, was obsessed by a kind of medusation, petrification of his own life. He was something, melancholy prevailed. The river Alphé came back to its sources. He wrote a lot of poetic texts about stones, pierres. So he didn't find the solution, but other people around whom he had stimulated to think on that, Benjamin, not the last one, found out other solutions which are maybe more interesting than his own. One could say the same of the idea by Canetti I mentioned before, or Verwandlung, metamorphosis, the idea that you can become the other. He wrote a very beautiful text about the thinking through animals. The thinking, thanks to, there is a story in the book you maybe have been forwarded about, for instance, a donkey with the skin of a tiger. So he thought to the problem of power thanks to the way a donkey, it's an old story, I cannot summarize it in a few words, but you find in a lot of culture all over the world. You cannot say, oh, I don't agree with the story. It's simply a way to show to you to understand the problem of use mimicry in that case, to the camouflage of a donkey in order to eat without being disturbed by anyone. In a field, in a meadow, and the fact that the hunter uses camouflage as a way to kill him, discovering that it's not a tiger but a donkey. So thinking through animals in another way, so the metamorphosis in this way, becoming other from what you are, it doesn't mean that you, like in the myth, become a tree, become an animal. You feel what happens to it, and so you are changed, you are transformed. And this is an aesthetic experience, but also a moral experience, but also another way to use the mimetic faculty, or to interpret it. About the last question, I don't remember the second question you raised.
Il rapporto con il totetismo di Canetti, I riferimenti politici.
By Canetti, totemism is an antidote to the paranoiac attitude. So to the idea he criticized in the President Schreber memorabilia about the description of the world, the fantastic imagination he had, the President Schreber, the Judge Schreber, he quotes in Crowd and Power, but if you read the essay on Hitler following Speer, the architect, that was written after the publication of Crowd and Power, since the text by Speer was published later than the book of Canetti, he comments the relationship with Hitler, Hitler with his architect Albert Speer, more or less with the same words he uses speaking of the president or Judge Schreber in Crowd and Power. So the reference to this is the fact that his interpretation of totemism as a peaceful way to live together. He also refers to some kind of utopia, like the Pueblo Indians of New Mexico, but is a kind of antidote to this reductio ad unum, to the fact that you become, you use a mask, you become rigid, you don't distinguish between, or better, you reduce the mimesis to imitation, to copying, the position between metamorphosis and copy. So the totemism is an antidote to this Erstarrung, to become rigid, not able to be someone who gives different answers, which hasn't instincts which direct his life, but has to choose, has to react, has to be involved in the environment. So in a certain meaning you are free and not simply obliged to react or to give feedback in a unique way. That's maybe what one could sketch, but since we meet again in a few days, we can go on with this point and find a wider answer, but if this is not enough. Thank you so much for your question.
Muito obrigado.